The story begins with the protagonist recalling the memories of his previous life, where we realize that his life back then was extremely dull and exhausting, as day after day he pushed himself through the crowded, delayed train after work, living the same routine without any change. Then, when he opened his eyes once again, he discovered that he was no longer in the old world, and what stood before him was a completely unfamiliar body, the body of a small child, which made him rush toward the window, where he stood gazing with curiosity at the vast and luxurious capital city stretching endlessly before him. At that moment, his personal maid, Xiao, felt afraid for him since he was still very young and standing near the window, something that could easily put him in danger. But the real shock was that this child, who had not even reached the age of 2, was capable of speaking normally. This child was Van Vetti, who after being reborn had retained all of his memories and knowledge from his previous life, while his maid Xiao continued to take care of him as he belonged to the Marquis Vetti family, being the youngest son with 3 older brothers. When it was time for the meal, the atmosphere inside the dining hall became extremely formal and well organized, as each person stood with their personal servant behind them, while the 3 sons took their seats one after another, starting with the 3rd son Citesto, followed by the 2nd son Yan, and finally the eldest son Mia, while the main seat was occupied by Marquis Jabba, the head of the family. As for Van, due to his young age, he was surrounded by several servants who carefully took care of him and fed him, and during the meal Marquis Jabba asked in a serious tone what each of them intended to do that day. Each of them answered with hesitation, and when it was Van's turn, he responded calmly that he wished to learn the culture and history of the state first, an answer that immediately shocked his brothers, since a 2-year-old child should not be capable of such thinking. At that moment, Marquis Jabba laughed loudly, pointing out that his young son, whom his wife Mira had left behind, possessed remarkable intelligence. Marquis Jabba placed great hopes on Van, wishing for him to inherit powerful fire magic like his parents, because if that were to happen, the future of the Vetti family would be completely secured. He was eagerly waiting for the magic element appraisal ceremony when Van reached the age of 10, as that moment would determine his fate in this world where the elemental magic system, fire, wind, water, and earth, plays a fundamental role in protecting territories, while rare elements are often considered a disgrace to the family. At this point, Marquis Jabba and all of his sons already possessed magic from one of these 4 basic elements. Later, when Van returned to his room, he was filled with curiosity toward this new world he was living in, and anything he did not understand, he would immediately ask the maid Xiao about, whether it was related to territorial borders or the different races that existed in the world. Despite his young age, Xiao explained complex concepts to him, which made the other servants warn her, but Van did not care about that at all, as his only goal was to acquire as much knowledge as possible, to the point that he personally requested to start learning magic at an early age. These unusual actions made all the servants see him as a genius, and yet the head servant Espada began to closely observe Van and give him special attention. After a short period, Espada brought him a stack of books that covered letters, numbers, and basic knowledge, and as the head servant who had served the family for many years, his strict personality created a clear pressure that Van could strongly feel in his presence. He began with simple questions, such as addition using fingers, which were extremely easy for someone who retained the memories of his previous life. Yet Van answered with a hint of tension, and soon after, Espada declared that he would personally take charge of his education. From that moment on, the lessons continued day after day, gradually becoming extremely harsh, almost like a hellish training regimen for a small child. But through that, Van managed to learn reading and writing, while acquiring a vast amount of fundamental knowledge, and time passed quickly over the course of 2 years, until he reached the age of 4. After that, Xiao began training him in swordsmanship, often teasing him because of his small body and limited strength, which caused dissatisfaction among the other servants, who saw such behavior as an insult toward the young master. Some of them even declared that executing her would not be unjust, and they all demanded that she be punished for her lack of respect. And in front of this situation, Xiao felt extreme fear and began to cry. But Van understood what was happening, so he stepped forward with a calm expression and lightly tapped her forehead with his finger, declaring that this was the punishment and that the matter was over. When some of them objected, Van confirmed that this was enough and that there was no need to exaggerate the situation. During that time, and because of his daily sword training with persistence, he became, at the age of 5, capable of facing young soldiers older than him, and although his movements were simple due to being a child. His opponents were unable to defeat him. The experience he retained from his previous life granted him a clear advantage, making him seen as a rare genius in swordsmanship, and from that moment he became known as a prodigy child. Different from many nobles and even from his own brothers, Van treated everyone with kindness, without distinguishing between servant or worker, which earned him the respect of those around him. The family's sword instructor noticed calluses and small wounds on Van's hands, clear signs of his intense training, and when he learned that Espada made him study 3 times more than an ordinary person, he showed visible shock, noting that this explained the harshness of the lessons. Elsewhere, the instructor offered to personally train Van in swordsmanship, and although Van showed his love for the sword, he did not wish to abandon his studies, so he decided to balance between the two. The instructor promised to make the training slightly lighter due to his young age, but the reality was different, as the exercises, such as swinging the sword and thrusting it hundreds of times daily, were extremely exhausting and no less difficult than his studies. On the other hand, the instructor was so strict that he even imposed how Van should sit during rest, forcing him into extremely exhausting positions that were tiring to even look at, and the only person who treated him with kindness during all of this was Xiao. Even so, through these harsh days of training, Van began to feel that his life in this world had become enjoyable and carried far more meaning than his previous life, and he truly started to enjoy his time. When he reached the age of 6, he became widely known by the title of the prodigy child, a title that had followed him since his birth. However, the harsh days of study and training, which repeated day after day, began to make Van feel exhausted, and although the situation was somewhat acceptable at the beginning, and he still had time to enjoy his daily life, with the passage of time the schedule became extremely crowded, to the point that any time in which he could relieve himself or rest disappeared completely. In the end, he was no longer able to endure it, so Van requested to go out and wander outside, as he wanted to see the market of this world with his own eyes, and he decided to live just one day as a normal child. We moved to the market, where the place was overwhelmingly crowded, with shops lined up beside each other, and people moving in every direction within the heavy crowd, making the market full of life, and it was the largest market in the city, housing the main headquarters of the Merry Trade Guild, the largest trade guild in the entire region within the kingdom. While Van stood there, fascinated by the scene, he suddenly noticed a small child bound with ropes, being dragged through the street as if he were merchandise being sold, and at that moment his guards became alert. Van asked about the reason the old man was treating the child with such cruelty, and he was told that the child was his son and that he was selling him as a slave, while Xiao calmly explained to him that extremely poor families are sometimes forced to sell their children as slaves when they are unable to support them. During that, a girl came out from the trade guild building, and when she noticed the noble presence surrounding Van, Xiao quickly introduced him, explaining that he was the prodigy child and the youngest son of a marquis, while also showing the family crest as proof. This situation made Van feel embarrassed, and his face turned red, and the girl was called Rosalie, who belonged to the trade guild and showed great happiness upon meeting him, and he asked her about the price of that slave child. After she explained that the child possessed a weak magic element known as the theft element, she mentioned that the highest price he could reach was 3 large silver coins. Upon hearing that, the old man's anger flared up, and he grabbed the child and began beating him harshly, venting his anger due to the lack of money. And when Van saw this scene, he immediately decided to buy the child for 5 large silver coins and paid the amount at once, and only then did the old man leave the place. Van approached the child, cut the ropes that bound him, and greeted him calmly, and the child's name was Cam Shin, and he told him that he was now free and could go anywhere he wished. Xiao was surprised and asked whether he had bought him to become a slave, but he clarified that he only wanted to save him. Then he asked him whether he had a plan for what he would do next, or whether he wished to live with him. At that moment, the guards intervened and explained that the Marquis would not accept the entry of a child of unknown origin into the mansion unless he was in the status of a slave. Van apologized to Cam Shin and asked him whether he would accept becoming a slave in that case, and Cam Shin agreed immediately without hesitation and was extremely happy. Rosalie offered to help them complete an official magical slave contract, and Van was slightly surprised because he was not aware of the details, but he held Cam Shin's hand and went with her. Once the magic was activated, a mark appeared on the back of Cam Shin's hand, confirming that Van had become his master until he himself decided to cancel the contract. The contract fees were completely waived, waved, because this was the first time Van had used the services of the trade guild, and Van thanked Rosalie, which surprised her, as it was not usual for a noble to thank an ordinary merchant. After that, Van took Cam Shin with him and bought him new clothes. Then they returned to the mansion. After several days, Cam Shin came to Van and told him that Master D was looking for him for an important matter, and at that moment, Van gave him a piece of cake as a form of bribery and asked him to tell anyone that he was not present. Van noticed that Cam Shin was not wearing gloves, so he asked him about the reason, and Cam Shin replied that he saw no need for that because while serving Van there was nothing to be ashamed of or to hide, but rather he considered that a source of pride. At that point, Van told him that the gloves were among the things he had personally bought for him, so Cam Shin wore them immediately without hesitation. Shortly after, Uncle D appeared and confirmed that he had seen Van entering the place, but Cam Shin insisted that he was not present, making the situation seem strange. Cam Shin replied calmly that it might have been just an illusion, but when D noticed the crumbs of cake on the ground, he immediately realized that he had been bribed, so he laughed and said that ignoring the orders of the vice commander was not something simple. Cam Shin answered honestly that he only listened to the orders of Master Van. This response greatly impressed Dai, and when he saw his courage and firmness, he decided to personally train him instead of Van, as if he intended to draw out all of his hidden potential. Time passed, and Van became 8 years old, and at that stage, the time for the magic element determination ceremony had arrived. The entire city spoke of the ceremony, and curiosity filled everyone's hearts, as Van had long been known for his kindness, making many await the day he would become their ruler. According to the traditions of the Vedi family, its members usually awakened fire or wind magic, but Van's result was shocking, as he possessed no primary element and instead awakened production magic, a type considered weak because it required raw materials to create anything. This magic was commonly used for crafting weapons or ornaments, things ordinary craftsmen could produce, which enraged Jabba, who demanded how such an ability could protect the people. Since all family members had powerful combat magic, having a son with production magic was seen as a disgrace, and in anger he declared his mistake in trusting Van, drawing his sword and nearly killing him. At that moment, Mia intervened and stopped him, proposing that Van be sent to govern a small village within their territory, a place of little value, surrounded by danger and near a hostile border where its people lived in instability. Jabba accepted the idea and appointed Van as its ruler, forcing him to leave, while praising Mia for making use of someone he deemed useless. The shock was heavy, and Mia apologized, explaining it was the only way to save him, but Van calmly thanked him, saying he owed his life to him. Mia promised to help as much as he could, while Xiao was furious at the injustice, yet Van accepted the situation, even feeling curious about ruling the new village. Preparations were made quickly, and his belongings were loaded onto a carriage, but surprisingly, no official knights accompanied him. Secretly, Miria had arranged 10 adventurers as protection, ensuring Van was not left alone except for Cam Shin, which eased his worries. Xiao chose to follow him, unwilling to remain behind, while Di joined to continue his sword training, bringing 2 guards, and Espada requested early retirement to accompany him, becoming responsible for his studies. Although Van felt they would leave him no time to rest, he still carried both relief and unease. The carriage bore no family crest, as his father wished him to leave quietly, but before departure, a girl ran after them, and it became clear that Dai had announced his departure openly. Because Van was loved, many gathered to bid him farewell, wishing him well, and placing their hopes on him, giving him courage for the journey ahead. During the trip, Van tested his production magic by creating a small knife, realizing that despite its simplicity, it had practical use. Before reaching the village, he allowed Cam Shin to return and canceled the slave contract, but Cam Shin refused, pledging lifelong service and even his life for him. This deep loyalty embarrassed Van greatly, as Cam Shin's respect bordered on devotion. At that moment, the carriage suddenly came to a stop. He quickly informed the guards that the village ahead was under attack, and that the attackers were likely bandits or experienced mercenaries. Van analyzed the situation calmly, realizing the village wall would not last long against arrows, while the villagers stayed inside in full defense, and after a quick look, he estimated the enemies to be around 50. Uncle Dai wanted to join the fight, but Oho warned him against acting recklessly, reminding him their role was protection, not risking their lives, while Dai insisted he could at least push the bandits back. Unable to accept the village's destruction from the first day, Dai Dai suggested ensuring Van's safety, which everyone agreed on. Then Espada stepped in, refusing to risk D and proposing a plan. Build a defensive wall, let the adventurers attack from behind, then strike from the side once the enemy is distracted. But Van refused using Espada as bait, as losing people like him or D would ruin any chance of developing the land, and in the end, he made his decision. He would be the bait. Everyone was shocked. Xiao objected strongly and insisted on going with him, while Kam Shin offered to take his place, but Van refused, unwilling to sacrifice anyone important to him. He declared he would drive the carriage straight toward the enemy while the others attacked from both sides, adding that his daily training with D made him confident, and if needed, he would sacrifice himself for his people as their ruler. At that moment, Oho remembered their first meeting, realizing Van was nothing like arrogant nobles, as he had shown humility and genuine respect, which made him decide to support him fully, along with his team. Beryl admitted they never trusted nobles before. But Van was different, even memorizing their names, which made them willing to risk their lives for him. Dai confirmed that protecting Van meant protecting the future of the family, while Espada emphasized his duty to instill that responsibility in him. The plan was executed immediately, as Espada created defensive walls, while the teams took positions, and once the bandits fired arrows, counterattacks quickly reduced their numbers. As their leader tried to shift tactics, D launched a direct assault, while Oho attacked from the other side, forming a perfect pincer that blocked escape routes. Under pressure, the bandits began retreating, but their leader rushed forward recklessly toward the wall, and at that moment, Van appeared with great speed, striking from behind with a fatal blow. Kam Shin followed up, finishing the enemy with a decisive strike, leaving Beryl shocked by Van's true strength. Soon after, all remaining bandits were captured, and the team achieved a perfect victory without losses. Oho originally planned to leave, but after seeing Van's decisions, he chose to stay and help, while some members left and others remained out of curiosity to see how this young ruler would develop his land. Meanwhile, Xiao was still worried, but calmed down after the battle ended safely. The villagers gathered at the gate, and Van stepped forward as their new ruler, greeting them with respect, while the village chief Londa thanked him and explained that bandit attacks were frequent. He also revealed that during Count Ferdinand's rule, patrols provided protection, but that disappeared after the land changed hands, and since the village paid low taxes, it received little attention. Van understood the system, but declared that he came to change their fate. He proposed 3 solutions: creating value the kingdom could not ignore, securing income to hire mercenaries, and directly developing the village. The villagers admitted they had tried before without success, and although Van promised to protect and develop the village, their expressions remained doubtful. At that moment, Espada spoke, confirming that Van had been exceptional since childhood, to the point they called him the prodigy child. Uncle Dai introduced himself as the of the family's knights, which served as a strong guarantee for Van's words, and through their combined reputation, the villagers' trust began to grow gradually, even if it was more because of them than Van himself. After that, the village chief asked about the plan in detail, but when he learned that Van possessed production magic, silence spread among the people as if their enthusiasm had vanished, and one of them expressed concern about taxes. Yet Van declared that he would only take 1/10 of the previous tax due to their difficult conditions, a decision that shocked everyone. The first step Van decided on was strengthening the wall surrounding the village, and Espada explained that the walls created by his magic would return to dust once the magic faded, but Van accepted it as a temporary solution. And with that, Espada activated his magic, raising multiple earth walls within moments. Then Van suggested digging a trench around the village to slow any future attack, and Uncle Dai and the knights took on that task, while Van understood that rebuilding the village required everyone's cooperation. Elsewhere, Van entered the forest to gather wood and test his magic, sensing the mana within his body as he imagined wooden fibers intertwining to form a strange piece of material, and when he described it as something like nanofiber, Xiao and Kam Shin did not understand what he meant. When Oho examined it, he found it extremely light yet abnormally strong, to the point that even striking it with a sword left no mark. By evening, Xiao noticed that Van had been using magic all day without exhaustion. Even though production magic usually consumes a large amount of mana, Van crafted a katana and gave it to Kam Shin, and when Xiao asked for a gift, he created an axe perfectly suited for her. During that, Van realized that everyone was exhausted and that the priority was to provide a comfortable place to live before any further development, so he decided to build a house. The next day, he arranged the wood and asked for a suitable location, and Londa told him he could build anywhere. Then Van used his magic and constructed a large house before everyone's eyes, leaving them stunned, and although he felt it was somewhat oversized, he mentioned that he could build homes for everyone if enough materials were available. The villagers became excited and began gathering materials, with the adventurers joining them, and when the chief asked for help in rebuilding, while the residents complained about their ruined homes, Van felt the pressure but decided to build new houses for everyone, which brought great joy, and within a short time, new houses appeared as the old ones were removed, amazing everyone with his power and organized method. Van explained that he used a grid-based layout, where each unit consisted of 4 houses separated by organized paths, making all homes similar to ensure fairness, with plans to upgrade them later when resources became available. The villagers thanked Van and offered him part of their crops, but he continued working and built a simple public bath beside the mansion, where water was filled using magic while Kam Shin heated it, and everyone enjoyed it. Even Beryl expressed surprise at this level of comfort. At night, Van bathed, followed by Kam Shin, and Van noticed he had grown stronger, while Kam Shin felt weak compared to Dai, but Van explained that such a comparison was unreasonable, and suddenly the knights entered the bath carrying their swords, preventing Van from leaving under the excuse of strengthening bonds, which left him slightly annoyed, despite feeling relaxed afterward. The next day, they began digging a water canal to serve as both a defensive trench and a daily water source, bringing water from the river, with Espada handling a large portion of the digging, while others expanded the canal, and Van reinforced the sides using his magic, as Dai showed great enthusiasm. Despite the scale of the project, everyone worked together efficiently and completed much in a short time, but Van stopped them to rest when he noticed their exhaustion, and the next day they resumed work, and once the gate was opened, water rushed in powerfully, bringing joy to everyone. Van then suggested creating a storage lake behind the village, and the idea was quickly implemented, forming a large lake that ended the villagers' worries about water, prompting the chief to thank him, while Van felt happy to help. Elsewhere, a young girl sat inside a carriage with an arrogant woman as they traveled toward a distant village. Returning to Van, he continued building the wall around the village, and the project was nearing completion. The new wall became far stronger than before, capable of repelling bandits, and Van also created defensive crossbows equipped with shields, turning the village into a small fortress, making him realize that his abilities alone could have made him valuable to the Marquise. Later, during a meal, Xiao expressed concern about food shortages, while Espada pointed out the need for a stable income, as there was no trade and resources were lacking, which pressured Van to consider creating a unique industry for the village. At the same time, the new weapon was tested, and when Kam Shin used it, he split armor in half with one strike despite it being wooden, shocking everyone, and Van repaired it immediately. Soon after, they discovered copper, silver, gold, and the rare metal mithril, suggesting the land was not fully explored, and when Van created an iron sword for the first time, he succeeded quickly, leading adventurers to request more weapons, which he agreed to provide freely. Espada warned that mithril might indicate a nearby dungeon, increasing both value and danger, so they chose to avoid the area for now. As development continued, a warning came about giant armored lizards approaching, so they raised the bridge and sealed the gate, and Van declared the battle critical, urging unity, while calmly assigning positions on the wall. Although he intended to fight, Xiao stopped him, leaving Dai to lead, and despite facing nearly 40 massive lizards, they followed Van's plan, using iron arrows to eliminate many. When the iron arrows ran out, Van suggested wooden ones, and though doubtful, Dai trusted him, and they proved effective, leading to victory and relief among everyone. Afterward, Xiao embraced Van, while the knights acknowledged his strength, and they processed the lizards, saving valuable parts and using the meat, aided by Van's tools. That evening, they celebrated, with Oho's team praising his weapons, and although requests were made for more, Van delayed them, and as they realized the value of the lizards, concerns arose about taxes and corruption, making Van worry his father might reclaim the land. Espada suggested informing Miria, instead of the Marquis, to hide the truth and buy time. The next day, 2 merchants arrived, amazed by the defenses, and agreed to buy all the materials, requesting time to prepare, and Van accepted, even giving them meat, and after seeing his weapons, they agreed to the price without negotiation. He asked them to help promote the village, and instead of monopolizing trade, they agreed to open a shop there, which Van built using his magic, forming a long-term partnership. Elsewhere, a noble girl and a knight arrived, and Espada asked Van to design a city for 10,000 people, leading him to propose a star-shaped fortress. The guests introduced themselves as Panamera and Aros, and when asked about his situation, Van explained his exile, while Dai and Espada confirmed they followed him willingly. To prove his ability, Van transformed an earth wall into solid form and built a strong gate, shocking them, and explained that this was production magic, despite being considered weak. Panamera then proposed a political marriage between Van and Aros, but he politely refused, stating his goal was to develop the village. She admitted her opinion had changed after seeing his abilities, praising him, and when asked, Aros shyly admitted he was kind, though she had never considered marriage seriously, and Van told her to take her time. Panamera decided to stay until the next day, and instead of hosting them in the mansion, Van built a full inn. Later, they shared dinner, and Van spoke with Aros, learning about her love for dolls and flowers, and when she felt his genuine interest, she excitedly showed him her collection. Afterward, he escorted them to the inn, and as Panamera stepped away to give them space, Aros gathered her courage, told him he was a good person, then quickly retreated to her room. After that, Van returned to the mansion, where Espada noticed that a marriage between a baron's daughter and the ruler of an unknown village usually meant that Aros did not possess elemental magic either, and when Van heard that, he suddenly realized that she was just like him, as both had been cast away from their original place, so he decided that if she wished, she could live freely in the village even without any engagement or marriage. Early the next morning, Tio woke Van quickly because of something strange at the lake, and he was surprised to learn that the villagers had named the new lake after him, making him think he had to stop them before they named the entire village after him as well. When he arrived, he found everyone gathered, and Tio led him to the source of the commotion, where a mermaid was hiding beneath the water, and Espada explained that Apkalo mermaids usually lived in primitive rivers deep within forests and rarely interacted with humans, making her appearance extremely unusual. Van tried to speak with her, but she did not respond, so he assumed she might not understand human language, and instead asked for grilled meat, believing that everyone understands the language of food. And when she saw it, she swam closer and asked if she could eat it, and after tasting it, she recognized it as armored dragon meat, and asked who defeated it. Van was about to say it was everyone's effort, but the villagers insisted that he was the one responsible, and upon hearing that, she showed satisfaction before diving back into the water and disappearing. Van thought he would not see her again, but despite being told that mermaids were shy, the entire tribe appeared the next day in front of his house, leaving him shocked, and he assumed they came because of the armored dragon, even wondering briefly if they worshipped it, though Espada denied that and advised him to ask directly. At that moment, the Mermaid King appeared, large and imposing, introducing himself as La Vista, and he explained that he came to thank Van for treating his daughter kindly, and when Van confirmed that he helped defeat the scaled god, while stressing it was a group effort, the mermaids whispered in amazement at how a child could do that. The king called Van a hero and declared he would marry his daughter, Lada, to him, which shocked Van, who replied honestly that she was still too young and did not understand marriage, and when he asked for the reason, the king explained that their tribe avoided humans, but the armored god had recently invaded and killed many of them, so he was willing to marry his daughter to any hero who defeated it. Van understood the situation but refused, explaining there was no need to use marriage as a guarantee of safety, and that Lada should choose for herself when she grows up, and that he would help them simply because he wanted to. After that, the king requested that his tribe settle at the lake and become part of the village, and Van agreed, immediately creating 2 floating houses in the center of the lake, allowing the mermaids to finally feel stable. During that, the topic of sanitation came up, and when Van explained the village layout and underground drainage system, the king showed great interest and offered help, as his tribe was highly skilled in water control, and with their support, the burden on Van was reduced, while the king considered managing the system the least he could do in return for a safe home. At that moment, Aros and Panamera arrived and were shocked to see the mermaids, and suddenly, the king called Van my son-in-law, thanking him, which left both girls frozen in disbelief. Panamera began to suspect that Van had married a mermaid, especially since Aros arrived earlier, and before he could explain, Lotta proudly declared herself his wife, increasing the tension between Van and Aros. Van suggested going on a boat ride the next day to clear the misunderstanding, but Aros replied that she had already heard everything and that there was no misunderstanding, which relieved him, and she also praised his achievements in developing the village. Soon after, Lotta returned, and seeing Van with another girl, became jealous, while many mermaid children gathered around the boat, shaking it and calling him their master while asking for meat. And because of the shaking, Aros accidentally fell onto Van, blushing in embarrassment, while Lotta's jealousy grew even more. Van had to repeat that he refused the marriage and that there was no engagement, which made Lotta frown before diving away. Yet the children continued shaking the boat until Aros held onto Van tightly to keep her balance. Moments later, the Mermaid King appeared with a serious expression and declared that he heard Van was courting another woman despite being married, and although Van denied it, the king ignored his explanation and announced a competition between the two sides, stating that if the mermaids won, Van must officially accept the marriage. Before Van could respond, Tio accepted the challenge on his behalf, promising victory as the deputy commander, while Espada agreed to settle the matter quickly, and Panamera supported the idea. Although Van was worried about losing, Tio reassured him, and he eventually agreed, and the king proposed 3 rounds for fairness, giving Van the right to choose the first game, and instead of picking something favorable, he chose water ball, a game unknown to both sides, creating a field in the lake and explaining the rules. Everyone was surprised, especially Espada, who had never heard of it, while Panamera noted that the swimwear Van created was perfectly suited. The match began quickly, with Panamera and Tio representing Van's side, while Lotta and the king played for theirs, and from the first move the king scored easily, soon dominating alongside his daughter, creating a large gap. At halftime, Tio began to lose hope, but Panamera reminded him of his loyalty, restoring his determination, and in the second half they improved, gradually closing the gap until the final moment. Panamera leaped to block the king's shot but failed, and Tio could not reach in time, allowing the mermaids to win the first round, leaving Tio shaken, while Panamera remained strangely optimistic. The king then suggested the second game as a swimming relay race, and Van immediately realized the disadvantage for humans in water, yet Tio remained confident, and Kam Shin volunteered to participate. The competition began, with Lotta and Kam Shin taking the first turn, and as expected, Lotta quickly took the lead, swimming freely and diving underwater to increase her speed, while Kam Shin pushed himself to keep up. When Kam Shin reached the end and handed over to Tio, the situation changed completely, as Tio chose the butterfly stroke, one of the most difficult swimming styles, which surprised Van, but the knights explained that this technique maximizes muscle strength, and Tio surged forward like a speedboat, overtaking the mermaids and winning the race. The Mermaid King could not believe he had lost a swimming race, while Tio was extremely proud, not even noticing that the force of his speed and the water pressure had caused his swimwear to slip off. Still unsatisfied, the king turned to Van and asked him to choose the third game, the final round. And after thinking about a fair challenge, Van created an ice shaving device, asked Panamera to freeze the water, then shaved the ice himself and poured sweet syrup over it. At first, no one understood, until Van announced that the final challenge would be a shaved ice eating contest, and that he would participate as well. The contest was quickly held inside the mermaid's floating house, with 4 participants, and once the start was announced, all 4 began eating rapidly, yet none could avoid the intense ice headache. The Mermaid King endured the pain, determined to marry Lotta to Van, and Lotta followed with equal determination, making Van feel his team might lose. But Aros overcame the pain and began eating steadily, spoon by spoon, which gave Van the courage to continue. And after a difficult struggle, Van and Aros finished first, winning the decisive round. The king accepted the defeat calmly, and Van finally felt relieved to escape the forced marriage. Yet the king still called him my son-in-law, claiming he had proven himself even more worthy. Before leaving Van confused about the meaning of the entire contest, and shortly after, Van suffered severe stomach pain from eating too much ice. At that time, Panamera praised Aros for her effort, while Aros stood quietly, watching Van surrounded by his loyal companions, which made her wonder why she had never received such care and affection. Since childhood, she had been neglected, her father busy with work, and her mother leaving her to a maid, and over time, her shy nature caused her to be overlooked and seen as weak. Her only strength was puppet magic, allowing her to control dolls with precision. But when she tried to impress her mother, she was rejected and cast aside. As in noble society, puppet magic was not only considered useless, but even seen as dark magic, isolating her completely. When she turned 10, her father sent her to marry the lord of an unknown village, filling her with fear. Yet Van was nothing like she expected, as he was kind, confident, and loved by everyone. Despite possessing magic others deemed useless. Watching him now, she decided to train her puppet magic seriously, hoping one day to be recognized for her true abilities. The next day, Van gathered the villagers to begin a new construction project, encouraging them with the promise of a large barbecue feast at night. And at that moment, Aros approached him, asking to work with him because she wanted to become like him, which he accepted happily. At the same time, an unknown threat was pursuing a group called Otto and putting them in danger. After completing the wall project that Van had proposed, the village expanded rapidly within just 2 weeks, with the wall becoming much stronger and the defense system improving greatly. Panamera was shocked by the scale and speed of development, while Van found himself slightly distracted by her appearance, and Panamera held a clear ambition to obtain land of her own, seeking to achieve military success that could grant her such an opportunity in the future. When Panamera saw a strange device in front of her, she asked about it, and Van explained that it was a spear launcher developed from an older model he had made before. Then he asked Cam Shin to test it, and the strike was extremely powerful, astonishing her. When she learned that there were more than 100 of these devices on the wall, she immediately wanted to buy them at any cost, but Van refused, and when she insisted, he asked instead for a favor to be returned in the future, then questioned how she would transport such a heavy device and prepare the spears, and she replied that she would use a carriage and could forge iron spears herself, but Cam Shin advised her to first buy 1 or 2 of Van's spears to understand the difference. To prove it, Cam Shin drew his sword and suggested testing it on something else, and although Panamera said his sword looked ordinary, she brought out her spare blade and declared that breaking it would be a real achievement, and when Cam Shin swung his sword, she felt no impact. Yet moments later, she was shocked to see her blade split cleanly in half. He explained that the sword had been crafted and refined by Van from ordinary metal, and that the spears used by the launcher were made the same way, yet strong enough to pierce through 2 or 3 armored scale lizards in a single strike, which left Panamera even more amazed and eager to purchase more, allowing Van to take advantage of the situation with his natural sense for trade. At that moment, Otto's team returned to the village in panic, chased by a massive dragon, and Otto asked everyone to retreat while they distracted it, but Van refused to let them sacrifice themselves, while Panamera offered to help, realizing the dragon's arrival was inevitable, and Van thanked her and ordered the beast to be drawn toward the spear launcher zone. Panamera took command and declared full readiness for battle, explaining that they were facing a mid-level forest dragon, and Van apologized to Eros for frightening her, while assuring her that with the improved launchers they had a chance, even noting they could defeat it with the older version. Then he ordered Tio to stay and protect her, while calling Tio's men as reinforcements. As they approached the gate, Van realized that flying enemies posed the greatest threat to any village, and Sarah attempted to draw the dragon's attention, which immediately chased her, forcing her to act as bait while ordering the others to retreat, and Otto also tried provoking it to divert its focus. Van ordered a second volley from the launchers, but it failed to deliver a decisive blow, and Panamera declared she would begin her attack to restrict its movement, launching a massive fireball that struck the dragon with a powerful explosion, yet it rose again, proving far stronger than the armored lizards. When it spread its wings and took to the air, the launchers fired again, this time piercing one of its wings, and Van ordered another volley, but the dragon dodged with terrifying speed. Otto's team finally reached the base of the wall and felt a moment of relief, yet Van realized the danger was far from over, as Panamera continued buying time with another fireball, which the dragon initially avoided before it changed direction mid-air and struck it, forcing it to fall and giving them a chance to retreat. But the creature rose again, leapt over the wall, and destroyed one of the launchers. Amid the chaos, Van noticed Espada advancing toward the dragon, and immediately ordered him to retreat due to the danger, but Espada continued forward and used earth element magic to raise a massive wall, causing the ground to tremble as solid masses of earth collapsed and buried the dragon beneath them. Van was amazed by the power of the attack and ordered everyone to retreat quickly inside the village, while Espada withdrew calmly, remarking that running might harm his bones and that the long path could exhaust the team, and at that moment Van realized they needed to buy more time, or the dragon would cause massive destruction. Fortunately, Panamera declared that she was ready, and Van seized the moment to claim the favor she owed him, and as the dragon rose and approached the wall, she had to use her magic to restrain its movement, while all spear launchers fired at once, which she accepted despite the bitterness of using her power only to hold the target. The dragon advanced toward the village, and Van ordered everyone to prepare, stressing that they should fire only with precise aim, while he searched for a way to gain more time. And at that moment, Tio appeared with 2 of his men and charged toward the dragon at incredible speed. When Van wondered if 3 were enough, Tio confirmed they had the right weapon and would not struggle, and they attacked directly. But the dragon countered with its claws and launched a fierce assault, and although the 2 knights tried to support him, they were struck and thrown aside, forcing Espada to quickly intervene and raise a massive earth wall to protect them. After buying enough time, Panamera unleashed a decisive attack, a massive fireball that exploded upon impact, forcing Tio and his men to retreat quickly to avoid being burned, yet the dragon remained standing within the flames. At that exact moment, all spear launchers fired simultaneously, and the spears pierced its body, and as the flames faded, Tio approached to confirm the kill, but the dragon suddenly opened its jaws to bite him, and in a split second he dodged and delivered a decisive strike, cutting off its head. The village erupted in cheers and joy, as Aros and Tio rushed toward Van to check on him, and he reassured them that everything had gone according to plan, while Panamera congratulated him on his leadership, noting that the victory was achieved because of him, though he insisted that the credit belonged to everyone. Panamera pointed out that many villages would have been destroyed by such a dragon if not for fighters like Tio and Espada, which made Van feel proud of his team. Yet she also reminded him of the overwhelming power of the spear launchers, as she still could not believe they could pierce a dragon's scales. Van mentioned the need to improve the system so it could fire 10 spears at once, though Panamera considered that excessive. Soon after, a celebration ceremony began in the village, where Van announced that they had defeated a dragon and that it was time to honor those who contributed, then invited Panamera to speak. She stated that a single dragon could destroy a village, or even an entire city, yet this village not only survived, but did so without casualties, with damage limited to part of the wall and 2 launchers, and she began naming those responsible. First D, who delivered the final blow, then Espada for his mastery of earth magic, and finally Van, the 4th son of the Vedi family, who led with wisdom beyond his age, used magic innovatively, strengthened defenses rapidly, and took full responsibility as a ruler. As Van felt embarrassed by the praise, Panamera looked at him and recalled her own long journey toward status, realizing that despite meeting many people, she had never encountered someone like him. Her thoughts drifted to the past, as she had been born in the capital within a traditional knight family, showed talent in magic early, and was sent to a higher training ground, and by the age of 16, she became the commander of the regional knights, eventually earning the title of Viscount from the king in recognition of her achievements. Years later, Count Ferdinand requested to meet Panamera and asked her to accompany his youngest daughter Aros to marry the ruler of a distant land, and when Panamera met her, she found her extremely frightened, believing her family had abandoned her, so she understood part of her feelings, but explained that she was the only one among her siblings who had not yet been engaged, and assured her that if she did not want the marriage, she would personally help her refuse it, then advised her not to worry and only hope to meet someone kind, as she herself had felt the same fear when she left her home in the past. But after meeting Van, Panamera realized that Aros no longer had anything to fear, as the shy girl began to open up and move forward beside him, feeling a kind of energy she had never experienced before. Because of that, Panamera declared before everyone her intention to form an alliance with Van, explaining that the previous ruler had not provided real support, but this alliance would guarantee protection from any future invasion. Van immediately understood that this alliance was the best choice, not only for security but also for the economic gains it would bring, and Panamera emphasized that he should aim for greater goals, as he had already transformed a small village into something advanced in a short time, and with this alliance, the nobles of the kingdom would recognize his political connection to her. Van thought that as someone abandoned by his father and without standing among nobles, this was a rare opportunity, so he accepted the alliance gladly. The next day, Van sat with Espada discussing the village's future, and Espada explained that the wall had proven its effectiveness in the dragon battle, and that it was time to focus on planning and development, which Van agreed with, recalling his idea of building a city for 10,000 people. Espada confirmed that the goal was reasonable and suggested attracting new residents, and at that moment, Tio entered, informing them that 2 merchant brothers had arrived with members of the trade guild. Van became eager to receive them and decided to start by selling the dragon parts, and the merchants explained that a forest dragon was extremely rare and valuable, with profits reaching around 100 platinum coins. However, during inspection, the older merchants exchanged glances and whispered, and when Van asked for their opinion, they offered to buy everything, claiming no one else could offer better, but proposed a low price of 60 platinum coins. Van told them he would consult the 2 brothers before deciding, which made the older merchants uneasy, and they pulled the brothers aside, urging them to cooperate, saying they all belonged to the same guild and should maximize profit. The brothers refused, insisting that a true merchant must offer a fair price, but the older merchants ignored them, believing Van would eventually accept due to lack of options, then grew angry, threatened to expel them from the guild, and left. Van asked the brothers if expulsion was possible, and they admitted there was a high chance the administration would side with the older merchants, which could ruin their reputation. At that point, Van suggested they establish their own trade guild, surprising them, and they explained the requirements: paying registration fees, owning a shop, and most importantly, having noble sponsorship. Van immediately went to Panamera and asked for her support, and she agreed to sponsor them, while he expressed concern about conflict with a powerful guild backed by the royal family. But she reassured him that such a large institution would not care about a small noble supporting a small guild, and she also saw it as an opportunity to build a positive reputation by supporting honest merchants. Van suggested that she claim credit for slaying the dragon to gain fame and protect himself from his family discovering the truth, but she refused immediately, explaining that such an achievement would be investigated and the truth would surface. Van grew worried that discovery might lead to him being summoned and losing the village, but Panamera explained that the only way to avoid that was to gain an independent noble title, noting that titles could be inherited or earned, and as the son of a marquis, he could request the title of baron from the king if he declared himself the dragon slayer. She added that she had faced many enemies when she gained her title but overcame them, even advising him that if anyone tried to harm them, he should respond with force using the spear launchers, a harsh but effective method. Van understood her words and felt he had learned a way to survive, even if the idea seemed intimidating. After that, he returned to the brothers and told them that Panamera would sponsor them, and although they were initially shocked, they soon became overjoyed at the chance to establish their own guild. They purchased all the dragon parts for 130 platinum coins, far higher than previous estimates, and began preparing to transport the goods to the capital. However, a problem arose when the older merchants seized all transport wagons, leaving the brothers without a way to move their goods. And as they struggled to find a solution, Van offered to build a new wagon for them, and at that moment Panamera appeared and allowed them to use her own carriages. The older merchants laughed with confidence, believing the 2 brothers would return to them once they failed to find transport, but they were shocked when Panamera passed before them with a new carriage, realizing that the brothers would indeed establish an independent guild under her sponsorship. Shortly after, Panamera traveled to the royal capital to meet King Dino, who welcomed her warmly and asked if she sought a new promotion, but she explained that her visit was to request a noble title for a friend who protected a distant village and could not leave it. When the king asked about his identity, she told him it was Van, the youngest son of the Vedi family ruler, who had defeated a forest dragon, which surprised everyone in the court, as the king had assumed Van was a powerful elemental mage. But Panamera clarified that he only possessed production magic and was no older than 8. She then recounted his achievements. Upon arriving at the village, he found it under attack and, with a small group of knights and adventurers, repelled the bandits, then used his magic to transform the ruined village into a strong fortress, and afterward defeated the forest dragon. The king was impressed, and Panamera presented a dragon fang as proof, inviting him to visit the village himself, assuring him that seeing the results firsthand would confirm everything, and perhaps even justify granting additional land, which pleased the king, and he ultimately decided to grant Van the title of baron. Panamera spread the news among the people, and soon everyone began talking about Van's achievements. Meanwhile, Van continued developing the area, building new houses to give it the appearance of a bustling city, and constructing 2 tall towers inside the walls to strengthen surveillance and defense. And while sitting with his companions atop one of them, they observed everything they had accomplished. During that, Espada pointed out that the place now deserved to be called a city rather than a village, suggesting the name Van City. But Van refused, not wanting to turn his name into a symbol, even though the others liked the idea. They then enjoyed cakes prepared by Tio, using ingredients from the brothers' shop, which had grown rich in resources after establishing their guild. At that moment, Kamshin noticed a group at the gate, and when Van went to check, he found thin refugees asking about a place called Sato. Espada explained that this was the old name of the village, though not officially adopted, and when Van asked why they had come, they said they were from a nearby village suffering from heavy taxes and labor shortages due to military conscription, and after hearing about the rapid development here, they came seeking help, revealing they belonged to Count Ferdinand's lands. Unable to ignore their condition, Van decided to accept them as new residents, assuring them they would not worry about taxes at first, and that he would provide housing and enough food, which left them shocked, wondering if this place was like paradise. Their leader explained they were about 300 people, so Van arranged for adventurers to escort them and prepared transport for their belongings. And when they mentioned having 10 cows, Van felt pleased, seeing an opportunity to develop dairy production. Soon after, Otto and the adventurers returned safely with all the refugees, and although some questioned why Van helped without reward, Beryl told them to focus on work, and everyone began assisting the newcomers. Otto spoke with an exhausted woman who admitted she had feared leaving her home, but he reassured her that this new place was like paradise. And upon arrival, Van organized a welcoming barbecue, where the refugees were overwhelmed by the quality of the food, with many moved to tears. After eating, they asked about work opportunities, fearing they might be expelled otherwise, but Van reassured them they could work in the new shops or in farming, while experienced workers would handle more complex tasks. At that moment, the old village chief spoke, saying life had improved greatly since Van's arrival, and that they wanted the newcomers to benefit as well. Then Van offered sweets made from cow's milk, explaining that their lives would continue improving as the village grew into a true city. For the first time, they felt they were not living merely to survive, but to begin a new life. And as major construction projects ended, life became calmer, with improved roads and houses making the place more beautiful. During that time, Espada noted that it was time for Van to return to focusing on his studies, after neglecting them for a while. But at that moment, Otto and his team appeared with tense expressions, apologizing as they reported discovering a dungeon entrance near the village, which alarmed everyone. Espada stressed the need to inform the capital immediately, as such news would attract adventurers and bring chaos, and might even reach Van's father, leading to him being summoned back. Van realized that hiding the matter was impossible, and since Sarah had discovered the dungeon, he assigned her to travel to the capital to report it, gifting her a sword made from the rare metal mithril, which delighted her while leaving others slightly envious. After things settled, everyone set out toward the capital, and along the way, Sarah encountered an overturned carriage, surrounded by massive beasts. Yet despite the danger, he charged forward with his new sword, and fought them all, defeating them quickly. After the battle ended, a girl emerged from hiding, impressed by his skill, and assuming he was a famous adventurer, but he replied humbly that he was just a traveler, and after thanking him, she planned to continue to the capital on foot. Yet he offered to accompany her since they shared the same destination and let her ride with him. She told him that her father had been a baron but was killed in a conflict, and afterward their land was taken from her, causing her to lose both her title and her home, and she intended to go to the capital to work as a servant for a noble family. Sarah reassured her that she did not have to follow that path and suggested she come live in the city, explaining that it was developing rapidly and offered work opportunities and strong protection. Meanwhile, Van began planning for the future, and with the discovery of the dungeon, it was certain that adventurers would begin to gather, which would change the peaceful nature of the area. So he decided to build a small city near the dungeon to regulate movement and maintain order, assigning Espada to oversee it. The project began immediately and progressed quickly, and according to Van's estimation, the new city would be completed in about a month. Soon after, Sarah returned to the city accompanied by a girl, and when Van asked her name, she politely introduced herself as Flameria, explaining that Sarah had saved her from creatures called Oros during the journey, and from their interaction, Van sensed feelings between them, so he smiled and welcomed her as a resident, especially as the city continued to expand. At that moment, a large group of adventurers on horseback approached the city, causing Van to feel tense at first, thinking something had gone wrong, but Sarah reassured him that they were simply adventurers coming to explore the dungeon, and Van realized that this marked the beginning of a new phase of activity. The adventurers appeared rough, with sharp features and loud voices, but this proved to be only an outer impression, as their behavior was chaotic at first, yet after Josh dealt with them firmly, they became more respectful toward the townspeople, and many were surprised that Van was only 8 years old, yet had become a ruler managing a successful city. Shortly after, Oho and his team returned, and when they saw Flameria, Otto asked Sarah about her, learning that she was the girl he had rescued, and Oho understood the situation, showing slight annoyance that he had not been the one to do it first. Then Van asked Bloral about the dungeon area, and she explained that the surroundings did not have many monsters, but the environment was extremely harsh, making permanent construction difficult, which is why adventurers relied on temporary tents, though she noted that Van's abilities could make building there possible, and expressed interest in having him construct facilities near the dungeon. Van tried to avoid the request, citing his responsibilities in protecting the city, but Bloral reassured him that she and the others would handle protection, and that Espada was strong enough to manage things. And even when Van attempted to set difficult conditions to discourage her, she accepted all of them, and declared that work would begin the next day, leaving him surprised as his attempt to withdraw had failed. The next day, Van had to ride a carriage toward the dungeon, and the road was rough and full of holes, causing violent shaking, and along the way, a massive dragon appeared, but the adventurers cooperated and defeated it quickly, celebrating their victory. And although Van was initially annoyed, he calmed down when he saw the excitement of Tio and Aros. Later, Van suddenly ordered a stop, as a deep valley stood before them with only 2 wooden planks forming a fragile bridge, and while the adventurers saw no issue being used to danger, Van recognized the risk, ordered the adults to kneel and reflect on their recklessness, then used production magic to build a strong and safe bridge, allowing everyone to cross safely. Upon reaching the dungeon area, Van began executing his plan, first building a massive gate to prevent monsters from escaping, then constructing a luxurious inn where adventurers could rest after battles, turning the area into an organized hub around the dungeon in preparation for a new stage of development. The new structure amazed the adventurers, and as the sun set, Van remembered the curfew, handed over management, and returned, while Aros noticed Mithrin ore in the ground, and after confirming it, Van praised her observation, but upon returning they found Espada waiting, creating tension as Van feared his reaction, and without interference, Espada calmly took him inside. After that, Van went on a walk with Aros, and when she noticed the village's growth, she asked about the people's happiness, and he asked if she wished to live there, assuring her there was no pressure, and she admitted she truly wanted to be with him. After several days, the merchants returned, announcing the success of their guild and delivering profits, while also mentioning that Panamera planned to claim nearby land, and they brought Van a mechanical crossbow, which excited him, leading him to study and recreate a similar design using his magic. Aros noticed his focus on the weapon more than money, and he admitted that his magic was his greatest asset, while she said she had no special ability, but he encouraged her to train, and when she revealed her puppet magic, considered weak by others, he saw its uniqueness and encouraged her to use it, and when she animated a doll, he was impressed and confirmed its great potential. He suggested using it for performances, and although she hesitated, he encouraged her by reminding her that his magic had also been underestimated before proving its value, so she agreed to try. That evening, Van gathered the people in a theater and presented Aros's performance, and as the doll moved, the audience was amazed, but some recalled negative uses of such magic in the past, unsettling her and causing her to stop. At that moment, Van stepped in, calming the crowd and reassuring her, and remembering his support, she regained her confidence and made the doll dance with graceful human-like movements, increasing the audience's admiration. And after the performance, she bowed shyly, surprised by the applause, and when Van congratulated her, she embraced him gratefully. The next day, Kam Shin informed Van of a large procession at the gate, and when he went out, he found many people along with Panamera, and suddenly, King Dino appeared. The king announced Van's promotion to a noble rank and asked for his service to the kingdom, while also wanting to verify his achievements personally, and Van agreed to explain everything. He guided them through the village, showcasing defenses and crossbow systems, and when one weapon was tested, its power amazed them, and he explained the star-shaped fortress design that allowed multi-directional attacks, while Panamera commented on its strength, and Van noted he was still improving defense against aerial threats. The king was surprised by the speed of construction, and Van explained that everyone had worked hard despite the short time. Then they went to the lake, where the king noticed how naturally people interacted with Van, which surprised him. There, they encountered fish-like beings, astonishing them, while their leader welcomed the king, and soon after a rare metal appeared, and Van used his magic quickly, raising doubts about his abilities, and when questioned, he revealed the truth and asked to remain in the village, which the king allowed under the condition of cooperation. Suddenly, news of an attack arrived, and Van ordered everyone to prepare, but it turned out the creature was not a real dragon, but something controlled, leading the king to suspect the involvement of the kingdom of Ita. Elsewhere, a prince from the kingdom of Elenata led the attack, complaining about the mission, and upon arrival, instead of a village he found a fortified stronghold, and when they attempted to break through the gate, they failed. Then Van appeared and asked their purpose, revealing they were from Ita, and when the prince threatened an aerial attack, Van used a new weapon and brought him down instantly, shocking everyone. When they realized the king was present, tension spread among them, and Van asked if they intended to continue fighting, so everyone surrendered except the prince, but Panamera warned him, forcing him to surrender in the end. The king and his advisor acknowledged that Van was an exceptional figure and decided to reconsider the entire magic system, and after the prince was captured, he confessed that a long-prepared invasion plan existed, and that this attack was merely a prelude to a larger assault targeting another important city. Upon learning this, they chose to act quickly, and the king asked Van to accompany him, and although he hesitated because he did not want to leave his village, he understood the importance of the situation, explaining that his work was not yet finished, but Panamera reminded him of his noble duties, leading him to agree. Before departing, he appointed Espada to manage the village temporarily and requested that Dai and the knights accompany them. And despite his concern over their limited numbers, Dee reassured him, and when another group offered to join, Van promised them a generous reward, surprising everyone, and explained that those who risk their lives deserve fair compensation, which made Oho thank him and confirm that many would be eager to join. As for Sarah, she complained, feeling forced into it, but Van told her the mission was only reconnaissance, and that if she refused, she would miss the barbecue, causing her to agree immediately. Meanwhile, Panamera announced that she would return to inform Count Ferdinand and gather the army. Van struggled to choose a suitable weapon, as the large bow was difficult to transport, until Aros suggested bringing the Mithrin puppet he had created for her. Before departure, Van explained that this was the first mission for his knights, and that their objective was to protect the city of Scudito, while the enemy consisted of the Knights of Ida, yet he reassured them they would not be on the front lines, and that his main goal was for everyone to return safely. Elsewhere, Count Jabba was shocked by Ida's attack on Scudito, as he had believed it to be an invincible fortress, yet his army suffered heavy losses due to a new weapon and wyvern monsters. The wyverns began dropping bombs from the sky, causing the collapse of his forces, and before he could react, he faced a sudden assault, but barely survived after the attacker withdrew. Soon after, the wyverns headed toward the western gate, where they were met by the Mithrin puppet controlled by Aros, and she quickly shot them down, astonishing the mages controlling them, who then redirected all their forces toward that side. Aros demonstrated remarkable control over the puppet, bringing down more monsters and surprising everyone with her strength, as the rapid fall of Scudito seemed unbelievable. At that moment, Van decided to draw the enemy toward himself to allow the Knights of Scuderia to retreat safely, then ordered a withdrawal. Some were confused, believing victory was possible, but Van insisted that the most important thing was everyone returning alive, and that victory held no value if lives were lost. At the same time, Count Jabba began reorganizing his forces in preparation for a counterattack. Soon, reinforcements arrived, and the King of Scuderia appeared personally, and Jabba informed him of Scudito's fall and the new weapon that had destroyed his army. But unexpectedly, the wyverns suddenly changed direction and headed west, leading the king to assume they were drawn toward Van's forces. Abierta explained the rapid development Van had achieved in his village, mentioning that he had slain a dragon and gained a noble title despite his young age, which Jabba initially found hard to believe, though he could not doubt the king or the advisor. When the king noticed Miria's reaction, he asked if he felt jealous of his brother's achievements, but Miria denied it and expressed pride in what Van had accomplished. That night, Van and his forces set up camp in a nearby forest, and when asked about his next step, he admitted uncertainty, believing he had fulfilled his duty as a noble, yet he explained that failing to reclaim Scudetto would leave the threat too close. Aros remarked that this was her first time witnessing war, and began to understand how terrifying it was, and Van understood her feelings, but reminded her that they were still cooperating with Panamera and needed to provide support. After some thought, Van decided to develop a new weapon, a catapult for launching stones, allowing them to support the army from a safe distance without engaging directly, and Aros showed great excitement at the idea. At first, Van planned to build 20 fixed catapults and 5 mobile ones, but after reconsidering, he realized transporting them to Scudetto would be difficult due to the poor roads, so he changed his plan and decided to construct them directly on the battlefield using production magic. After that, he set out to deliver the new weapon, fully aware that it meant returning to the atmosphere of war, and upon arriving at a nearby city, he found a massive number of soldiers, indicating that Scuderia was reorganizing its forces after the defeat. There, he met his father, Gallia, who was shocked to learn that he had become a baron and slain a dragon, yet he could not believe it had been done using ballista. And soon after, Panamera informed Van that the king was waiting for him, agreeing to demonstrate the weapon to Gallia later. In the royal hall, the king announced his plan to reclaim Scudetto, and Abierta explained that the defeat was caused by monsters and black spheres, and without solving those threats, victory would be impossible, while Gallia confirmed that the weapon had been a nightmare on the battlefield. When Van was asked about his plan, he simply stated that they needed to eliminate the monsters quickly before the black spheres could be used, which seemed naive to many, but the king and Abierta considered it seriously and asked him to fight on the front lines, yet he refused, preferring to act as support to avoid unnecessary risk, which angered those present, and Gallia rebuked him harshly. Van explained that his priority was protecting his small village, and that Elenata might attack border regions, which created tension in the hall, and despite objections, he insisted he could contribute from the rear by preparing ballista and catapults, which reassured the king and Abierta to some extent, though it only increased Gallia's anger. At that moment, Van demonstrated his magic before them, creating ballista and catapults within moments, astonishing everyone, yet Gallia refused to accept what he saw and left. Van explained that the catapults would be used to bring down the wyverns, so the king decided to rely on him and ordered preparations for war to begin. Soon preparations were underway, as Van cooperated with Thompson to organize the artillery unit with everyone's support, while Panamera emphasized that this battle was decisive and that Van's weapons could change its outcome. When the battle began, Van focused on a single objective, eliminating the wyverns first. As Thompson and Panamera took their positions, Ortho assigned roles, and Dai secured the artillery. Despite his hesitation, Van advanced to Scudetto and once again encountered his father, Galba, who remained unconvinced of his strength, then met the king who was preparing to reclaim the city. Van repeated his proposal to quickly eliminate the wyverns, which drew the king's attention, yet he maintained his stance of not fighting on the front lines, preferring a support role, sparking further debate before the king intervened. He once again stressed that his goal was to protect his village and that Elenata could strike it, so he chose to support from behind, and the king agreed, after which Van began producing weapons at incredible speed, astonishing everyone. As the battle unfolded, these weapons successfully brought down the wyverns, shifting the tide of the fight until victory was achieved. However, it soon became clear that another assault was targeting multiple regions, and elsewhere, Artie rushed to defend her land only to find it completely destroyed, and though she and the adventurers tried to stop the disaster, they could do nothing but watch. Her daughter could not hold back her tears as she saw her city collapse, yet Sharon told her to remain composed, attempting to ease the situation in a harsh manner, stating that in the end, it should appear as though the eldest daughter had died with honor, as befitted a noble. Despite the severity of the moment, Sharon held her daughter and told her not to worry, though she could not stop thinking about Artie, her younger daughter. On the other side, the enemy commander declared that the Ferdinand territory could not withstand the army of Elenita and ordered its immediate occupation, and the soldiers raised their swords, convinced that victory was within reach. But suddenly, one of the wyverns fell from the sky, completely destroyed. A soldier reported the presence of a silver knight attacking the wyverns, yet in reality, it was the Mithrin marionette controlled by Artie. From her position, she controlled the puppet with precision, coordinating its movements to eliminate wyverns with clean, decisive strikes, leaving the soldiers of Elenita stunned, unable to comprehend how so many wyverns had been destroyed so quickly. Then the commander was informed that the flag of the Ferdinand family had appeared on the hill, and upon seeing Artie and the adventurers, he assumed Scudito had sent reinforcements. He immediately ordered a change of target and directed the army toward the hill. And when asked about the Silver Knight, he dismissed it as irrelevant after neutralizing the main force, ordering the entire army to advance. Zara reported that the enemy was heading toward them, and Artie understood that this would not be as easy as Van's battles, as she was still inexperienced and her hands trembled. Despite that, she refused to retreat, requested support from Ortho, and called upon all adventurers to help save her land. And when Ortho asked about her plan, she suddenly declared that she would advance to the front lines herself. Artie rushed to the front lines without waiting for a reply and immediately controlled her marionette to confront the army of Elenita directly, and its movements were so fast and powerful that the enemy could not even perceive it, while Ortho did not hesitate and charged after her, followed by the adventurers, and with their speed and weapon strength they dominated the battlefield as the enemy could not match their pace. At a critical moment, Zara found himself surrounded, and Artie intervened instantly, ordering the marionette to shield him, and even when one of its arms was destroyed, it continued moving, striking fear into the soldiers who believed someone was fighting inside the armor, and she used their confusion to eliminate them at once, and Zara thanked her as the battle continued. After intense combat, they secured the area, but suddenly Bloral announced that the battle was not over, as an entire force of Elenita mages appeared in the sky, commanding nearly 50 wyverns, and the enemy commander revealed he had anticipated such resistance and had already called for reinforcements, ordering the wyverns to attack the Silver Knight. Ortho warned everyone of the danger, but Artie continued fighting and brought down the first wave, yet the overwhelming numbers quickly surrounded her, and at that moment, a second marionette appeared, revealing that she was controlling two at once. Despite knowing her magical energy would not last, she focused and issued commands to both, and they struck with precision, bringing down many wyverns in rapid succession. She remembered her past when she had seen herself as a failure because puppet magic was rejected, and she had sworn never to use it again, but Van gave her confidence and restored her belief in herself. With determination, she fought on, eliminating half the wyverns in moments, enraging the enemy commander, who ordered the remaining forces to attack with full strength, yet Artie refused to retreat and declared she would protect what mattered to her, even with a magic others deemed weak, and in the end, she destroyed the last wyvern. The army of Elenita collapsed, fleeing in terror, and Ortho raised his sword to declare victory as the adventurers celebrated a flawless win without casualties. Artie looked at her Mithrin marionettes and stated that the victory was achieved through them, then approached the first one and apologized for forcing it to fight until it was damaged and lost an arm, expressing her gratitude for saving her homeland. At the same time, Sharon and her daughter observed everything from the Ferdinand Palace, relieved that the enemy had been driven away, yet unaware of who saved them, and after searching, Count Ferdinand found them and expressed his happiness for their safety, and when his daughter asked about reinforcements, he explained that the army of Elenita had been defeated by only 2 marionettes, adding that he had seen a young girl with white hair leading the battle. Sharon was stunned, and when she confirmed the truth, she broke down in tears, while the Count admitted his regret, reflecting on the irony of having cast Artie aside in the past. Elsewhere, Zara asked Artie if she would return home after the battle, but she refused, saying her return might cause trouble for her family, and although others tried to persuade her, explaining that people would rejoice in the truth, she remained uncertain, especially knowing her mother despised her magic, so she chose to return to Seto, where Van awaited her. Thus she left her homeland without seeing her family, despite having saved it. When she returned, Van and the people of Seto welcomed her warmly, and she admitted she still saw herself as inferior to him in leadership and felt like a failure, but he reassured her, affirming that she was strong in her own way and encouraging her to develop her style, and she was moved by his words, smiling sincerely as he welcomed her home. After that, Sito continued to develop under Van's guidance, as he used production magic to construct shops and modern inns, transforming the once poor village into a thriving city. And as he walked with Artie, he showed her the progress, explaining his goal of giving everyone a comfortable life. The settlement became a vibrant community where trade flourished and adventurers supported the residents, and Van noticed the harmony among everyone despite their differences, so he decided to hold a grand celebration to unite them. During the festival, laughter and food filled the place, as a comedic argument broke out between Zara and Ortho, while Bloral continued drinking without concern. Van watched the scene with happiness, recalling his past life and how he had been cast out because of his magic, yet here he had found friends and a new life, feeling deep gratitude for everyone around him. Suddenly, Espada interrupted him, reminding him of his study schedule, and Dai declared he would train him to become the greatest knight, while Espada insisted he must become the greatest scholar. Van shouted in refusal and ran away through the celebration, as everyone cheered him on, with Zara urging him to run faster before he was caught. As he ran, he looked around and saw how much the village had changed, remembering its beginnings and realizing it had become his true home. He recalled how they overcame armored lizards with only a few arrows, and how Panamera helped them defeat the forest dragon, earning him his first title, and understood that everyone he met contributed to his success, and every experience shaped what the village had become. With these thoughts, Van finally stopped, filled with determination, and decided to face everyone and declare his resolve to continue developing this place into a better future for all.